Hello, I'm Howie Sheriff, and welcome to another show from You Call This Yoga, an educational nonprofit organization who is hosting our talk about accessible yoga. What I mean by accessible yoga is the practice of yoga in part of the limbs that we call the tree of yoga. There are 8 limbs, not just the physical practice, but how we can actually put the practice and concepts of yoga, mind body connection into practice, whether it's through movement, thinking, breathing, your acts. And therefore, we bring on guests from around the world. And even we're most fortunate in this case from our own backyard. We have on the show today Tim Keim, who I've met through our Yoga for Youth NC relationships, and it has blossomed into Tim helping us share the benefits of yoga at Yoga Fest and now through our show. We'd like to engage you on our show and invite you to call in at 919-518-9773. My marker is blocked. Or you could Skype on at Computers 2K Voice, or also logging onto the chat box at your nissancommunications.com website page. Tim has trained as a yoga therapist, but he's also in training to be an Ayurvedic physician. He's learning many modalities of how yoga can be accessible for himself, as well as for his clients and the students that he's come in contact with. So we're thrilled that he is a wealth of resource here. Let's bring Tim on to the show and introduce him to you.
Hi, Howie. Thank you so much for having me on the air with you today.
It's a joy, Tim. It's part of this blessing that we have of having this show where I can have a seminar one-on-one with a leader in our field. So it's a thrill. Thank you for educating me and our viewers and listeners.
It's a pleasure. As I practiced and have seen how yoga has helped me, it's just a natural outlet to want to offer this to others, because there is so much suffering in the world that can be handled in the way we take care of ourselves and how we move our bodies and how we breathe and how we eat. So having learned to do this for myself in dealing with conditions that I've had as a young man and now as an older man, it's very empowering to be able to feel that you have the tools to take care of yourself, so that you're not going to get in a position to where you need really extreme interventions.
Yes, it's important. I think you were talking about yoga as a life toolkit, if I remember the phrase correctly.
Right.
Well, you referenced something about experiences as a young man. Are you willing to share some of what you've been dealing with or have dealt with, and some of how yoga has influenced your course?
Yes, of course. Absolutely. Fire away.
Well, what were you experiencing as a young man?
Well, when I was young, I had what I call our family curse, which is Crohn's disease. And Crohn's disease is an inflammatory condition of the digestive system that can occur anywhere from the mouth to the anus. And I was very, very sick and hospitalized 5 times, and was, of course, told that this was incurable by my doctors. And I never quite believed that. I always figured that there was some kind of way I was going to be able to heal and cure myself of this. And so I stumbled around for about 20 years, and then finally found yoga and began to use my yoga, meditation practice, and some dietary adjustments to heal myself. And I haven't been sick since 2007. And I really feel like I have mastered the tools to stay well myself and to help other people do that as well.
Hmm. So, doing the math, it seems like it took quite a number of years then once you became deeply involved with healing yourself.
Yes, when my first exposure to yoga was when I first got sick, but I was a very foolish and impetuous young man. And when someone realized that I had this condition, they said, "Well, you'll probably have to do yoga for the rest of your life." And of course, being the fool I was, I rejected that. And it wasn't until I got back pain some years later that someone reintroduced me to yoga. So this was recurring for me. And because I was in immediate pain, and I thought, okay, I'll give this a try. And after a couple of weeks of doing these postures, even before I had a mat or a teacher or anything, I just used this little booklet that a friend of mine had given me. After 2 weeks, the back pain was gone. And so, not being quite as stupid as I was when I was 14 years younger, I thought, I'm going to keep doing this. So
Hmm.
that's when I began reading, researching, uh, took my first yoga class when I went to the Expanding Light in Nevada City, California, because I was living in Reno at the time. And that's when things really began to click for me that this is something I could use to take care of myself for the rest of my life because it was easy to do. I could do it at home. It was absolutely free. And for me at that time, because at yoga, I don't, excuse me, in Reno at that time, there were no yoga classes to my knowledge. So it was just me in my living room with this little book, and I was getting results.
Hmm. So, it is pretty astounding that one could take the explore inward with self patience and time to make significant changes.
It is. I mean, I've always been a kinetic person. I've always wanted to move. And so it was quite natural for me to use movement to try to address these functional uh, conditions that I was having, whether it was back pain. And when I first started really practicing yoga, I hadn't made the connection yet about how I could use this, how I could use my breath, how I could use my state of mind, because a lot of these inflammatory bowel diseases, at least for me, were a part of my own unskillful response to stress because I was feeling a lot of anger. And that's very much according to my constitution, what we would call in Ayurveda the Pitta constitution, where heat is involved to a great degree. So anger is going to be something that a Pitta constitution person uh, experiences when they're out of balance. And of course, as a very out of balance person at that time, that heat was expressing itself by causing ulcers in my small and large intestine.
Mhm.
So it took me a long time to figure that out because I didn't have any mentorship, but finally I was able to use yoga asana to diffuse the tension and emotional state that I was experiencing to become a calmer, cooler person who was able then to heal himself from this really dreadful disease.
Mm. Yes, so it's an interesting process when you can endure something for so long and it just becomes part of the landscape and our mindset that this is the way it's going to be, and that you've been able to reconfigure that. Viewers and listeners, anyone with Crohn's disease or inflammatory issues, Tim is ready to share and give you some feedback about his experiences. And as a trained yoga therapist, he might be able to assist you. And also, we welcome your contact via the phone, Skype, or the internet. I'd like to move towards our first pearl as we have four pearls today from Tim. It's involving the breathing, and it's an interesting imagery and sensation that you might want to incur right now.
When students practice yoga, one of the things that I try to help them to understand is using the breath to reach into the body in unique ways because each pose is its own unique energy template. And what I mean by that is that energy travels differently according to the shape that your body's in. And that might be a novel concept to you, but try it when you practice next time. As you breathe into your belly, you can feel energy reaching into your body according to the unique shape. And the breath and the energy with it travels according to the unique shape that your body's in. And this is what I call the fingers of the breath. So next time you try a forward bend, feel, or a backward bend for that matter, feel how the breath moves in your body and massages your body in a particularly unique way. And that's what I call the fingers of the breath, and how the breath actually reaches into the body and massages your body and helps you to realize the posture.
Thank you, Tim, for sharing that wonderful sense of imagery and actuality of what can be achieved. You had mentioned about being kinetic, and since this is an accessible show, we'd like to emphasize that it doesn't have to be volumes of asana to create some sense of movement, because the breath is already part of the movement, I would believe. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. And what I was, to elaborate on the fingers of the breath, just to choose one posture that's a simple posture for someone to do just by lying down on your back and bringing your feet up under your knees and pushing off the ground, you're moving into bridge pose. To me, this is one of the great ways to massage the lower back in all of Hatha Yoga, because as you breathe into the belly, then the breath, the fingers of the breath begin to reach into the sacrum and sacroiliac regions to provide this wonderful, deep therapeutic massage that gets into the sacroiliac joints, into the tendons in the joints, and into the sciatic nerve. And sciatica, of course, is one of the great and very common afflictions of people who are injured during some kind of forward bending, generally, although it can happen back bending as well. But most back injuries happen during forward bending with some kind of weight or twisting. And by using that pose, it's amazing how deeply the breath massages the lower back when you realize the fingers of the breath moving from the belly into your lower back.
And I would also add to what Tim is pointing out about a pose that I believe we're often in a forward inclined positioning. I would call it a collapsed cat or cratering of mountain while seated. And that's my big thing about accessible yoga, in that your yoga may start exactly where you are and how you're positioned right now. So, viewers and listeners, would you consider, where are your feet? Where is your bum? How
Right.
is your head positioned over your shoulders, or likely not? And then can you start to foster some of this massaging right where you are and make it more accessible for you? Can you bring the breath down and let it just reach out under your ribs and fill the abdominal area, figuratively, as the lungs drop down? Can you feel all the lobes of your lungs just gently massaging you inside as you exhale? Just something to consider.
Absolutely, because what is happening here anatomically and physiologically, as you breathe into the belly, the diaphragm contracts and then puts pressure on the organs. So that's why we feel the breath moving not only into the abdomen, but into the entire pelvic bowl, down to the pelvic floor and into the base of the spine. And then simultaneously, it begins to rise up into the ribs, the solar plexus, and the chest, and all the way up to the top lobes of the lung, right here at the collarbones.
Mm. So, Tim, since we touched base on this, or I should say touched deeply on this, would you lead our viewers and listeners into one more round of imagery? I think this is worth repeating.
Sure. So to sit maybe up off of the back of your seat with your feet planted on the floor. And this is one thing I do routinely at a yoga class, is to take the hands here at the belly and row the shoulders open so that the shoulders, rather than being collapsed like this, are opened up. The chest is open. The shoulders are erect but relaxed. So now allow the breath. You can also place your hands on your belly with a little bit of pressure. and then breathe against your hands into your belly. And you can use the image of filling up a glass of water, because where does the water go first in that glass? It goes into the bottom of the glass. So feel the breath opening into your belly and filling up the pelvic bowl, and then ascending into the ribs, solar plexus, heart, and collarbones. And then pause there with your breath full. And then slowly, slowly let it out. And it's that full breath in the belly that helps to engage the parasympathetic nervous system that enables us to relax and to be calm.
Hmm. Now, what about this parasympathetic nervous system for those that are not familiar with the nervous system? Why is that important?
Well, it's important because a long, long time ago, we would engage the sympathetic nervous system, the active part of our nervous system, when we needed to fight or flee. But in our busy go, go, go kind of culture that we live in right now, we're always pressed for time. We're always trying to make the next deadline. We're always trying to get somewhere to pick up the kids, get to work, get to the gym, wherever it is we're going. We're always doing it in a hurry. And this puts us in that sympathetic nervous system engagement. And this encourages breathing in the chest, or what I call clavicular breathing. And we don't engage the diaphragm fully, and we don't massage the gut, or what is called the enteric nervous system, or as a lot of doctors and scientists term it, the second brain. A lot of us don't realize that a lot of the neurotransmitters that we produce, people think that they're produced in our brain. Well, 50% of the dopamine that we produce in our body is produced in our gut. Most of the serotonin, another wonderful neurotransmitter, is produced in the gut. And by using these deep, full diaphragmatic breaths, we're able to produce and stimulate the production of these neurotransmitters so that we can engage the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the relaxation part of our nervous system. So when we combine this deep belly breathing to engage parasympathetic nervous system with our asana, or our postural yoga, then we can begin to reach a deep state of relaxation and awareness as we practice.
Mhm. And it's fascinating too, because if we take a moment for reflection and visualize just how are we living our day, it may not always be a physical activity, but it could also be a mental activity that is driving your nervous system, or even an emotional situation. I'll be referring to this again later, but I was watching on SportsCenter last night a special about a young man named Crowther. Um, Gosh, I just blanked on his first name, but we'll get back to it later. But the point is that he was a hero on September 11th, 2001. And he was an incredible young man. And I was practicing my nighttime yoga, laying down, my legs up an ottoman, engaging my parasympathetic nervous system.
Yes.
And because that's how I wind down at night, since I am pretty wound up during the day, despite what might be this mellow disposition, because I'm very driven, if one knows me. And it was pretty incredible that as I saw this documentary of this incredible young man saving lives, with the question of what would you do in your last hour of your life, that I started crying tremendously, because I was aware of 9/11. I was keeping calm and carrying on. I was doing my dental practice, trying to not be disrupted. Yet I grew up in New York and I felt incredible pain. But then to watch and experience the family and all who knew this man and what he did and the survivors that he led to is just welling me up now. Uh, but the point is that here I am trying to engage my parasympathetic, and my sympathetic is just out of control.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm laying down, and all of a sudden my head is full of mucus. So I couldn't breathe. So it was a rather interesting endeavor of trying to go to sleep last night and negotiate my parasympathetic again in the midst of all this sympathetic surge by tapping into something so touching and so deeply also suppressed is a deep pain from the terrorist attack on 9/11. So, viewers and listeners, it's in there, and gaining access to this parasympathetic nervous system is a wellspring of healing. I'll just pause on that while I try to gain my parasympathetic again. Tim, take it from here, please.
Yes, the breath is the bridge between the body and the mind. So our mind, as Howie was saying, can be completely absorbed and involved in emotions that make us really upset, no matter what they are, whether it's a personal experience of disease or something, a national tragedy like 9/11. I had a student just yesterday at an early morning class who is a breast cancer survivor. She had had a mastectomy of her left breast, and she had never really dealt with this part of something that she had lost. So I had her in a reclining bent knee twist, and she was just saying, I can't do this, I can't do this. And I just let her struggle with it for a moment, and then allowed her to get her breath into her belly and feel how the breath was pulling and stretching this tissue through the left side of her upper body, through her chest, and how that fear began to dissolve. And she was overcome with emotion, and the tears just began to flow. And so she was able to use her breath to tap into the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the technical part of just realizing that she could deal with this thing emotionally in a successful way, and that she was free from something that had been holding on to her and gripping her and inhibiting her for over 6 years.
Hmm. And it's a fascinating thing about the pelvic area, too, in that second chakra area. I've had chronic pain in mine and a lot of emotional adjustments in dealing with the chronic pain and then the freedom afterward, and also seeing in my spouse and other folks how stuff can be
Mm-hmm.
stored in there. And even with liberation, it doesn't mean that it's totally free. That stuff stays in there, just like the body keeps the score, whether it be in the head or other areas of trauma. We've had trauma release therapy discussed on our show too. So, viewers and listeners, it doesn't just go away. It's not a light switch. And that's why Tim had spent so many years trying to address his physical problems, even the mental part, the denial. And I sure live in denial pretty regularly in my traumas and such. And if you don't, then please call in at 919-518-9773 and tell us about it. But if you are dealing with some sort of chronicity in your life and you'd like to address Tim, a yoga therapist and trainee in Ayurvedic medicine, which we'll get to later, then please do. But Tim had also prepared another wonderful pearl that we didn't edit his introduction out. So in case you don't know who's doing the next video, you'll soon know.
Hi, I'm Timothy Keim. And a lot of people think that to do physical activity, you have to strain and to stress your body. Well, really nothing could be further from the truth. What I teach is called comfortable engagement yoga. And initially, people can come to yoga from a physical exercise background, and then they try so hard and they may injure themselves. But it's really not necessary. In comfortable engagement yoga, it's exactly what it sounds like. You engage your body in a comfortable way by listening to your body so that you don't try to stretch too far or use too much strength. And can you get benefit from this? Absolutely, because if your body is being traumatized by too much effort, you're actually working at cross purposes with yourself. But when you relax into yoga poses, then you can actually gain more benefit in a relaxed way. That no pain, no gain stuff absolutely doesn't go.
Tim, could you share some of your renegotiation with pain since you had chronic pain Were you in denial about it, or was it just so gripping and attention grabbing?
Well, all of the times I've experienced pain, it's usually been acute enough to where denial really wasn't an option. Uh, Not only in Crohn's disease, but also in some functional injuries that I had. I was in a yoga class and I was actually injured by a teacher who was not a very skillful teacher. We were hanging away from the wall with some straps, and of course, that develops a very deep back bend. She put her foot in my sacrum and pushed really hard, and then I developed a sacroiliac injury and an injury of the sciatic nerve, and it took me 6 months to heal that. So what I found was that gentle forward bending was able to help me heal from that. And I didn't have to do anything extreme. And I think this is what one of the experiences that helped me develop one of the tenets of comfortable engagement yoga is that gentleness is the path to strength. And that's counterintuitive for a lot of people because I think in our hyper competitive society, people think that if you're going to do something that's effective, it has to be difficult, it has to be hard, it has to take all of your effort. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. Relaxing into a yoga pose and allowing gravity, the breath, and the architecture of the posture to deliver healing to any part of the body is all it takes. You don't have to strain, you don't have to screw up your face and use this tremendous amount of energy. And that's one of the just the wonderful discoveries I've made in my own practice and what I try to teach my students and clients as well.
And what we've come to find also in my experience is that work is something over time, and that something that is short cycled and unfully developed doesn't necessarily give you the full capacity that we might be seeking. If you can contract a muscle slowly, steadily, with the proper architecture around it, that muscle can develop an integrity within. It's not always compelling to tear muscle fibers to build muscle fibers.
No, not at all.
It's what is going on in the total environment. Even the realm of hydration, uh, which in this go-go society, and I'm guilty of that too, of over stimulating, over caffeinating, over dehydrating, leads to less complete development of muscle and cells and tendons. What are your thoughts about that, Tim?
Well, when you talk about this, again, this overstimulation, and I want to go back to the breath here and using these breaths that are from the, sort of just in the chest and in the clavicles without engaging the diaphragm, and how that is actually a stressful breath because when we're not fully engaging our diaphragmatic breath, we are in this constant sympathetic nervous system response, which again is, as you were talking about, go, 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 fight or flight. And what that does is that helps to increase the level of cortisol in our bloodstream. And that is one of those chemicals, that's one of those fight and flight chemicals that prepares us to deal with stress. Well, on an occasional basis, that's okay. But when we live in a constant state of sympathetic nervous system engagement and high cortisol levels, then that begins to make our bones weaker. Because then the body begins to leach bones out of, leach calcium out of the bones in order to deal with the pH of our bloodstream when that happens. And so as calcium begins to leach out of the bloodstream, out of the bones into the bloodstream, then our bones begin to weaken because we're in that constant state of sympathetic nervous system engagement. And this is one of the components of osteoporosis and osteopenia or bone thinning.
Hmm. Well, Amnon was kind enough to provide me with some water because I've definitely been underhydrated. So thank you, Amnon. Viewers and listeners, feel free to take a hydration break, take a little stretch break, roll around the shoulders as Tim had demonstrated before, and see if you can invite the breath down through your diaphragm to reach your abdominal. Give yourself a nice internal hug because we appreciate you tuning in. I wanted to share that October is actually a therapeutic month in the physical as well as mental and emotional. We had Elise Browning Miller on last week, who was addressing scoliosis. Tim, who is addressing many realms. His current title is a yoga therapist, but there's more. Next week, we'll have Sherry Clampett on, a yoga therapist. And then the following week, we'll have Stephanie Munaz, who is dealing with yoga with arthritis, yoga for arthritis. So we'll continue to present you pearls of wisdom. But let's get back to our current oyster, Tim. Tim, you became a yoga teacher early in the 21st century. How did that change your path?
Well, when I came to North Carolina, I wasn't able to pursue my career as a radio producer. And so I figured out, well, what am I, I just began to think, what am I going to do with my life? And of course, yoga had been a bright thread in my life since 1994 when I first began to practice. And then I discovered that yoga teacher training was going to be available to me here in Orange County, near where I lived in Chatham. And I knew the woman and the man who were teaching this. So I thought, I should do this because I wanted to deepen my own practice. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to be able to embody this for myself even more so that I could help other people. So I enrolled in the yoga mind body work with Lisa Clark and David Beadle, and it was transformational for me in how it deepened my own practice and enabled me then to begin to go on to teach and help others. So I began teaching in 2004, and I've been teaching in and around Chatham, Durham, Wake, and Lee counties for the last 14 years.
Just hearing the locations that you've cited, and viewers and listeners, these are not high-density urban areas by any means. That Tim has been a missionary for accessible yoga over the years, being willing to venture in places where yoga could be misconstrued quite readily, let alone in the 10 years ago or more, is rather bold endeavor. Tim also mentioned Lisa Clark, who we just had on the show about 6 weeks ago with Celia. Lisa has returned to our area and is sharing what's called embody yoga.
Right.
And that'll be shared at Evolve Studio in our region as well as other parts of the country. So kudos to Lisa for inspiring Tim, as well as the blessing that we have of her returning to the Triangle area. Welcome back, Lisa. Thank you for inspiring Tim. Tim, you mentioned about your sojourns into the different counties. And part of our introduction is when You Call This Yoga was early involved with Yoga for Youth North Carolina.
Yes.
And we were looking to expand the relationship into Orange County, Chapel Hill, Carborough area. You were involved in teaching youth.
Right.
And youth can be a whole nother sphere of experience. Could you share some insights about managing A, yourself as a teacher with youth, and then B, the sphere of negotiating with youth as a teacher?
For me, this was the most challenging population to teach, middle school boys. And I taught for 3 seasons in Orange County schools and some in Chatham County. And this is a population that really needs yoga, but it's also a population that at first blush really doesn't care about yoga. I mean, these kids are involved in so many things, and I think media is something that really, really is so all-absorbing for kids when they're that age, especially boys playing video games. And so getting a young boy to understand how to connect with their breath is a challenge. But I saw it happen on many occasions when they were able to do that, and how that changed their stress levels. And a lot of them identify it as having great deals of stress in their lives. And this is a big difference from, when I was a boy and now what these kids are experiencing as they grow up. So helping them to use their breath again as a bridge from the body to the mind and helping deal with their stress was, I think, one of the greatest tools that I was able to help them develop, to empower themselves, to govern their moods, to diffuse stress, to diffuse conflict, because we heard several stories about how these young boys, and I'm sure with the young women as well, how they would, in a school setting, commonly come into conflict with their peers, and how the breath was able to help them to diffuse those conflicts because they were then able to control themselves. And when you can control yourself, that's when you're able to contribute to something positive, to a difficult situation.
Life skills.
Absolutely.
And also, as you testified, it took you about 14 years to realize the benefits of yoga from one experience to another.
Absolutely, it did.
And I was introduced to yoga briefly when I was in dental school in my 20s, and it wasn't until, I don't know, I was in my 40s, I guess, that it became more apparent when one of my patients was a yoga teacher, and it was convenient, and I had enough pain.
A great motivator.
Yes. Well, at least it gets our attention for some of the time till we move towards denial, and then we can negotiate it differently. But in terms of negotiation, there's ways that we can engage a yoga pose and practice in a gentle and supportive way. And Tim's going to share this next pearl about it.
When I work with my yoga therapy clients or my yoga students, we quite often, because of their own particular condition, perhaps of an injury or some other kind of condition, we have to adjust postures along what I call the arc of engagement. And we have to work with degrees of engagement, because if a person has a particular kind of condition, maybe they have a back bending injury, but they can still engage the muscles that are involved in back bending, then it has to be done in degrees so that they can do that without experiencing any pain and still receive benefit from the posture. And that's what I call the degrees of engagement along that arc. And so this is what I help students to do, is to do things maybe they thought they couldn't do, but then they can do it in a gentler way to still receive benefit from the pose and stay just this side of the threshold of pain so they can be successful.
Also, a realm that I had read about is that gentle is the new power.
Absolutely.
And I think Jay Brown was citing that in one of his blog posts. So thank you, Jay, for pointing that out. How do you like to extend that concept of arc of engagement?
Well, this goes back to gentleness as the path to strength, because there's a whole continuum in the engagement of a yoga pose. You can go into the fullest engagement in the pose, or you can go into just the first degree of it. Let's say you've hurt your back in a forward bending injury, and then bending then is really difficult for you. Well, the antidote to forward bending is generally back bending. So just by lying on the floor on your belly and arching up off of your belly and bringing the shoulders up, maybe bringing the feet up in what we would call a locust pose, you can begin to antidote and massage the injured part of your body in your back. So if it's a forward bending injury, then you use a back bend. If you have a back bending injury, then forward bending is going to be the antidote to you. But at some point, you're going to then begin to engage in the very movement that may have hurt your back in the first place. But after you've done the therapeutic work of practicing the opposite of the injury causing motion, you will begin then to move again into forward bending. And this can be done in degrees. You may be standing on your feet and bend to just 90 degrees. And this is where comfort is something that you have to consider, because you ask yourself, is this comfortable for me? Am I a comfortably engaged person in my body right now? If not, then you back out of it a little bit. Or if so, maybe you can go forward a little bit more to engage that injured spot as you breathe deeply and send the breath into the site of injury to massage the injury and further heal it. So that's what I mean by the arc of engagement and degrees of engagement. You know, you mustn't think that you have to be fully and totally engaged in a pose to gain benefit. So just very mindfully move through the degrees of engagement to find what is comfortable and therapeutic for you, because you're the only one in your body and you're the only one who can tell where you should be in the arc of engagement.
Viewers, listeners, teachers, yogis, this is very significant. We had Matthew Sanford on the show, who was also engaging us about paralysis and the nervous system that goes through the skin. So the arc of engagement also begins with the imagery, the intention, the activation through the mind, through the breath, through the body, and that one can engage elements of our poses without grand movement, especially if you're unable to move. It doesn't mean that you cannot be engaging and constructing an arc of engagement. Also, on a sidebar, I said October, but I really mean September is our therapeutic month. So that's this month. I'm not talking about next month. We'll talk about next month at the end of the show. Thank you, Tim. Getting back to this arc of engagement too, viewers and listeners, the first pose in yoga is mountain, and engagement often begins through the feet. So I'll invite you to revisit, where are your feet and how is that happening? And then can you take a breath and get ready for our next pearl from Tim?
I quite often work with people, clients, both women and men, who suffer from either osteopenia, which is the precursor to osteoporosis, or osteoporosis itself, which is the thinning of the bones. And yoga has a great deal to offer people with either of these two conditions. Because what is happening as the bones thin is that then they become weaker and more susceptible to fracture. And what yoga offers is resistance to gravity and using the body's own weight to provide weight resistance without the use of external weights. Because now when you're using your own body, you're using weight with which you are intimately acquainted, so that you don't have to worry about how much weight should I use. So when you put your body into a yoga position that resists gravity, the osteoblasts, or the bone building cells in the body, respond by beginning to build more bone when the body is under stress. So yoga has a lot to offer people with osteoporosis.
Tim, tell us how you became focused on the realm of osteoporosis and penia.
One of my students came to me one day. She was a new student, and she was a woman in her mid-60s, so she was post-menopausal, and this is quite often the population that osteoporosis strikes. And she asked me to develop, and this was even before I was a yoga therapist, she asked me to develop a routine of poses that would help her combat osteoporosis. Well, I was completely flummoxed. I had no idea. So I said, okay, that I would do exactly that. And so I went home, and not knowing what to do, I began to consult various authorities and found that medically and clinically that it was resistance to gravity and weight bearing that helps the bones rebuild themselves. Well, I mean, that was easy. That was a no-brainer because yoga offers us so many ways to resist gravity and use the weight of our body to to put stress on the body in a way that, as I was saying, the osteoblasts are the bone building cells. So let's say you're doing a one leg balance pose. You're putting all of your weight on that one leg. Well, the body is getting this message. We're under stress. We now must build more bone in order to deal with this stressful position. So those one leg balance poses are really good for inciting that stress response in the body to get the osteoblast cranked up to building more bone. And there are many, many poses in yoga that do that. So I developed what I called the dynamic dozen, which are 12 accessible poses that just about anybody can do to help you begin to address this bone thinning or osteoporotic weakening of the bones. And that's what I did. So I went back to Karen and my student, and she began to practice that. And when she went back to her next appointment with the doctor, she had made significant gains in her femurs and in her spine. So that to me was great validation that I was on the right track.
That's fascinating, especially when it could be measured and that someone was motivated. We're going to show you our teachers and yogis, Tim's book in our JPEG. Uh, as you might see on the cover, that it is accessible. So Tim has written a book about accessible yoga. Could be the book for you. Uh, I've looked through it. It has very accessible poses. Plus, with coaching and good discretion, these can be adapted to other support structures, whether you're using a chair or a wall, or even having a teacher or a therapist to guide you.
Right.
These are poses that are conventional poses. He's not taking you on a pretzel factory tour
Not, not at
or
all.
anything that is apparently at risk. Of course, everything has risks, but I invite you to experience the dynamic dozen. Tim has taught this at Yoga Fest, and it has already been decreed by my wife that he will teach it again next year. Yoga Fest on April 7th, 2018. Tim, you're still more than what's been shared so far, and that you have taken a path of greater education. Tell us about your path to being an Ayurvedic physician.
When I was taking my yoga therapy training with the Inner Peace Yoga Therapy School, one of our teachers was Dr. Mark Halpern, who is the founder and president of the California College of Ayurveda in Grass Valley, California. And I was so impressed with Dr. Halpern, and I saw Ayurveda immediately as a way that I could offer my clients and patients more tools to help them care for themselves, and also to begin to use some of the medical modalities of Ayurveda, like the sense therapies and herbs, to help people overcome disease and find balance in ways that are that don't produce side effects, that don't threaten their health. And so just this last year in March, I began my Ayurvedic education with the California College of Ayurveda via their Veda web program, where I can do my academics online. And then, of course, I will have an 18-month internship at the end of my academics. And I'll be going back and forth between California and North Carolina frequently to do the hands-on methods that are necessary for me to learn that way. But I've seen tremendous results in my own life with Ayurveda, and I just want to be able to make this available here in the North Carolina Piedmont as well.
Hmm. Well, you mentioned making available. Would you also cite how your book is available for people to acquire it?
Yes, it's available on Amazon, and or you can also order it from your favorite local bookstore. And that's what I try to do. I try to buy local, and so I get all my books at McIntyre's Books in Farrington, which is on my beaten path as I go to and from Chapel Hill on the weekends. So so if you have a local bookstore, I encourage you to order the book from your local bookstore.
That would be great. The dynamic dozen, not the dirty dozen, unless you're doing it in the mud, but then it might be kind of hard to keep your balance. Uh, so that's about the book and some of your Ayurvedic path. One thing that's come to mind, and I'm not trying to be too disruptive, but
Oh, go
a-
ahead. Go ahead,
all
Howie.
right,
Let
bring
her
it
rip.
on.
Let her rip.
Uh, a lot of health providers prescribe herbs. Could you make a distinction between some of the training that they have to dispense herbs? And I'm not talking about Colorado, Washington, and Massachusetts
Okay.
or wherever, but the Ayurvedic medicines. What is the distinction between those levels of training and an Ayurvedic physician?
I can't speak to what, perhaps what a naturopath would learn, but in Ayurveda, and with the training that I have thus far, we're using some of the most common culinary herbs that people are familiar with, such as fennel. Fennel and cumin and herbs like cardamom. These are herbs that can be used in many different ways. One of the easiest ways to use them is as what we would say is a carminative. And carminatives are herbs that dispel gas. And this is a big problem with eating the standard American diet, is people quite often have problem with gas and bloating. And those are very simple herbs that can be used in either infusions or decoctions by steeping or boiling the herb, that just about anybody can use at any time. Ginger is another very powerful herb. I can give you an example of my wife. One time, she and I were at a restaurant. She got food poisoning, ate something a little off, and we woke up the next morning and she was in tremendous pain. And I made her some ginger tea. And this delivers the antimicrobial power of ginger directly in a topical way, to the site of illness. And within 15 minutes, she had complete relief from her acute food poisoning. That, I doubt very much that an emergency room at a hospital could deliver that kind of relief that quickly. So that shows you, again, just because something just gentle and common and familiar doesn't mean it can't be very dramatically effective.
Hmm. Well, I surely eat a lot of pickled ginger when I have sushi. Does pickling affect herbs or cooking, or are there certain ways that herbs should be prepared so that they maintain their therapeutic value?
Yes, pickling is a very different way and does alter the nature of a plant. You're adding what we in Ayurveda would call the sour taste, and you'll get that in all of your fermented products like kefir and yogurt and other fermented products. And so adding the sour taste helps to, and the reason they use ginger there is to help spark what they call the agni, or the digestive fire. So the sour and the salty taste are very good for encouraging your appetite. So the pickling then is one thing that helps to, if you take, and of course, when you take it with your sushi, you take it in a very small portion. So what you try to do in any given meal is to include all of the six tastes in your meal: your sweet taste, your salty taste, your sour taste, the pungent, the hot taste, the astringent taste, and then the bitter as well, in certain proportions, so that you're creating balance with each meal, so that food becomes medicine.
Hmm. Wonderful. Well, we've tried to emphasize that in our fun and yum good health tips. Uh, but another realm that viewers and listeners might be interested in is how to contact you, and other realms that you're sharing your wisdom. Tell us about it.
I have a couple of classes in Chatham County, one at the Yoga Garden, and then another at the Joy of Movement Studio, which is in the Chatham Mill on Hillsborough Street in Pittsburgh. But you can reach me via email, timkeim811 at yahoo.com, timkeim811 at yahoo.com. And if you have a particular need or need some help in the scope of what I do, I'd be happy to help you. But come to class if you can, and we can talk about it there.
Mm. And also, tell me about your WordPress site.
My WordPress, my sorely ignored WordPress site. I have probably maybe 80 to 90 blog entries on my WordPress site since I'm studying and working now, and that's really occupying a lot of my time. I haven't written a lot recently, but you can find a lot of past topics on my WordPress site, and you can also contact me through my WordPress site by making a comment on my blog as well. So, that is really encouraging for me too, because if you comment and contact me, that encourages me to write more, because I feel like that I'm getting some feedback for what I've written. And I'm a bit of a reluctant writer, but do enjoy it immensely. And I think you'll find great benefit from the site and some of the topics that I've tackled.
Wonderful. Viewers and listeners, we also welcome your feedback. There is a Rate This show where we do get feedback from you. So even if you haven't contacted us during this hour, and no one has at this moment, then I do welcome your contact after the show. Also, in terms of future shows, we do have Sherry Clampett coming on next week. Sherry will be part of an advanced teacher training at Blue Lotus Yoga in Raleigh. We'll catch her before the training, and I'm also petitioning to be one of their therapeutic students, since I'm also known as Arthritis Man and all my prosthetics. This is a show hosted by You Call This Yoga, where you can find information about our nonprofit organization at youcallthisyoga.org. We serve the physically challenged and underserved in the Triangle area, primarily in Wake and Durham counties, who are helping veterans, youth at need or at risk, and also physically challenged adults. We've had Tim Keim on the show today, who, Amnon, if you could show us Tim's book one more time. Thank you. Our Dynamic Dozen, I see and the address
of my website. Yes.
His website.
It's you can find it at Comfortable Engagement Yoga. So if you Google Comfortable Engagement Yoga, that will come up, so you can access my my webpage.
Wonderful. Earlier in the show, I referred to this video that I saw on Sports Center. I'm still blocking because I'm focusing on the show. I think the first name of the man is Wells. But if you look at the man in the red bandana, I'm inspired to get my own red bandana, because this is really such a concept of what would you do in the last hour of your life. I live with great urgency. I hope that you can turn that concept into something that you can do for you or others. Self-healing is a great start, because it's important to be available, and it takes all our resources. Tim has shared some concepts directly that we hope you'll visit his website, learn from his blog, consider taking a course, and keeping in touch with him, because he's going to be one of the few Ayurvedic physicians in our Triangle area in North Carolina. Wells Crowther. I did write that. No, I wrote Wells something else. But thank you. Thank you, whoever clarified that. And hopefully have your tissues handy, because this was incredible. Tim, thank you for being on our show today. It's been a joy to learn further from you. We look forward to, if you're available, April 7th, 2018 at Yoga Fest, as we look forward to sharing Tim's Dynamic Dozen and other concepts in Ayurveda and therapeutic yoga.
Thank you, Howie, for inviting me. Namaste.
Namaste all. YouCallThisYoga.org, and on our YouTube page, you'll see the show later.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.